I call this meeting to order now. Welcome to meeting number 37 of the Standing Committee on Veterans Affairs.
Standing Order 1082 and the motion adopted on Monday, October 3rd, 2022, the committee resumed its study on the National Strategy for Veterans Employment After Service. La réunion d'aujourd'hui se déroule.
Today's meeting will be taking place in a hybrid format according to the House Order adopted on Thursday, June 23rd, 2022. Members are able to participate in person or with the Zoom application. I'd like to let you know that you need to wait before taking the floor. Wait for me to name you. All comments must be addressed to the chair. Pursuant to our routine order around tests, I'd like to let the committee know that witnesses have completed the required connection test prior to the meeting. I would now like to welcome our witnesses. We have from the Ottawa Veterans Task Force, Mr. André Tivierge, co-founder and co-chair, Major, retired. Thank you for being with us today. I know that we had some technical problems last time, so thank you for being here in person. We also have from Veteran Staffing Canada, Jason Wall,
Director by video conference, et du réseau de transition des.
And from the Veterans Transition Network, Oliver Thorne, Executive Director by video conference. We are therefore going to start with our witnesses. Mr. Tivierge, you have 5 minutes, and as you know, I will let you know when you have 1 minute left and when you have no time left by showing these cards. And so, off we go. Over to you, Mr. Tivierge, for the first 5 minutes. Thank you. Mr. Chair, honorable members of the committee, it is with my pleasure that I co-preside the Ottawa Veterans Task Force. City Hall has given us a mission to create bridges between the capital and services offered to our veterans. When our military members decide to join the civil life, they have several options. First of all, they have to find a job that is valuable, and that's a key aspect to their transition. We have to understand that military personnel want to pursue a second career, and they have different motivations. Those who are transitioning are not so much attracted by benefits and salary. They're more motivated by the desire to accomplish a mission and to have a positive impact within their working environments. When veterans join a team, the notion of serving is still very much present. Within the community of employers, there continue to be certain stigmas when it comes to seeing veterans as future employees, all of them related to the idea that veterans struggle with mental health problems. Some employers also seem to underestimate the importance of the ongoing training and knowledge acquired throughout military experience and training. However, veterans also harbor certain perceptions and believe certain stigmas about employers in the private sector. For example, a veteran may act with the belief that employers do not understand veterans because they may believe that employers have a negative perception of military service and veterans as candidates for a job. This kind of attitude, fueled by such beliefs, may put up communication barriers and result in counterproductive dialogue. This can lead to fueling stigmas about veterans, and this lack of communication between veterans and employers often happens in the private sector. I think that the next steps will mean bridging the gap between the military community and all industry sectors so that we can deal with urban legends that seem to prevail on both sides. And this will go a long way to gaining a better understanding of the scope of these perceptions and their impact on the candidate recruiter and employer-employer relationships. Dialogue that aims to educate veterans as job candidates and private sector employers would provide a foundation to help build long-term and productive relationships between the ecosystem of support for veterans and local employers. It would also be worthwhile to develop relationships with human resource departments in various industry sectors in order to obtain a better understanding of recruitment and retention challenges and to gain a better appreciation of perceptions on both sides, which appear to be fueling biases. Such an initiative would contribute to promoting a change in culture, allowing for military personnel in transition through the sharing of information to be part of recruiting strategies. When I appeared last week during the committee's hearings, I was surprised to learn that very few veterans are employed in the federal public service. However, I was concerned to learn that only 4% of employees in federal departments that offered services directly to the military community is made up of veterans themselves. This leads me to believe that we have a lot of work before us. In conclusion, Canadian Armed Forces transition services have made leaps and bounds over the last years because they have managed to professionalize their transition services. Transition services are now offered using scientifically based information and based on well-being. Beyond access to jobs and so on, we believe that communities such as those in Ottawa can play a role to bringing people together and promote partnerships based on ongoing dialogue that is productive. We will continue to build bridges between employers in our community and the support ecosystem for veterans. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Mr. Thiverge. We are now going to move over to Mr. Jason Wall.
Yes, for your opening statement. Please open your mic and go ahead.
Well, first of all, I'd like to say thank you very much to the chair for inviting us here today. Give a quick rundown. Veteran staffing was launched in 2016 as an arm of the Athenian Group, a technical staffing firm that we founded here in Alberta. We've got clients across Canada, and we support them with their staffing needs. And part of that is we would have clients looking to us for support in hiring veterans and trying to find sources for that. At the time, we did have a resource, which was the Canadian company and the MET program that was predecessor to the current transition program. Which we found very beneficial. It had resources that we were able to connect with veterans directly. They had a website that they had posted resumes and profiles that we could reach out to. When that program was canceled and the VAC transitioned to the new program, we lost that ability to connect with veterans directly. And I think that was something that was a misstep after the last turn. Myself, I've been recruiting across Canada and the U.S. since I retired from the forces many years ago. And in that, one of the things we found is just the general lack of ability to source veterans outside of finding folks on a general website, be it Indeed or Workopolis, where they actually identify themselves. Any organization, be it public or private, does not have the ability to reach out to these individuals anymore. And that's definitely a shortcoming in our thoughts. The current program, CTS program, does provide, in our thoughts, valued resources to the veterans with resume writing and interview preparation guides, but it doesn't provide the support to the employers to source veterans. And I think that's the area that we need to focus on if you're looking at a new transition program. I think one of the other areas that we were looking at was actually trying to find out how many veterans there are presently for leaving the Department of Defense. I know CBC reported a while ago in the 2021 census, there is approximately 461,000 veterans that self-reported. Veterans Affairs Canada, using a mathematical equation came up with 617,000 veterans. I think finding out the actual number that's out there will greatly help figure out how we can help transition these folks moving into the public sector. We have had success previously supporting veterans moving into the public sector, but I think the biggest issue we have is finding the veterans themselves when they're looking outside of the number of different nonprofits that are supporting them. Some of the suggestions that we had come up with and resources that we thought would be beneficial would be coming up with a wage subsidy program, similar to something in place for students, newcomers to Canada, or underrepresented people in the workforce. That way, it actually gives the companies an incentive to go out and source these people. Secondly, the biggest thing I think to take away would actually having a tool or website that either run by Veterans Affairs or externally, where organizations could go out and actually source individuals directly. And I think that's a tool that we are desperately in need of and are missing since the program was canceled a couple of years ago. But I look forward to any questions. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Wall. Et maintenant, nous allons donc passer.
Now we will go over to Mr. Oliver Thorne from the Veteran Transition Network. You have 5 minutes for your introductory remarks. Go ahead.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Chair, and members of the committee for the opportunity to be here today. My name is Oliver Thorne. I'm the Executive Director of the Veterans Transition Network, which is a registered Canadian charity that provides counseling and transition programs for members and veterans of the Canadian Armed Forces. We deliver these programs across Canada for men and women in English and French. Aux membres francophones du comité.
For the Francophone members of the committee, I apologize, but because of the limited time, I prepared my presentation only in English.
While employment is a common topic of discussion on our programs, the focus of the programs that we deliver at VTN is mental health, family relationships, and military to civilian transition. So while I'm not a subject matter expert by any means in veteran employment, I can certainly provide the perspective of an organization that's provided transition services for veterans for over a decade. So with that in mind, I want to focus my testimony on 2 major topics today. That is access and cultural transition. So in the first place, in our experience delivering services to veterans across Canada for 10 years, one of the key issues that they face in the success of any service they receive is the issue of access. A good employment program will not be effective if it is not accessible to veterans, and particularly if it's not accessible to veterans who struggle the most in transition. We know from the research that there are a number of criteria that are associated with a greater difficulty in transition, so including a longer service history, an involuntary release, service in the junior ranks, service in the Army, and deployment are all associated with greater difficulty in transition after service. So my first recommendation is that if a veteran employment strategy is going to be effective, it must be built with the needs of those veterans in mind. To go even further with those veterans specifically, for those who are struggling the most, it's very likely that they will need other more immediate transition and rehabilitation services before they are ready to receive employment services. So my second recommendation is that there should be a strong relationship between the Veterans Rehabilitation Program and the services provided through the employment strategy so that they can refer back and forth and ensure that veterans don't slip through the cracks. The second issue is cultural transition. So for veterans, their employment transition occurs at the same time as a significant and major cultural and lifestyle transition. A good employment strategy has to acknowledge this fact and provide the appropriate supports to help veterans navigate that cultural transition so that they can be successful in their civilian education and employment after service. In our experience as a service provider, we see veterans reporting 2 major gaps. The first is a skills gap about certain skills that are required in the civilian environment versus those in the military. We see this particularly in professional communication style and in financial literacy as well. These are both pieces that the private sector and the education sector does a very good job of preparing people for when they go out into the working world after a post-secondary education. But the requirements in these areas in the military and civilian contexts are quite different. So once again, for an employment strategy to be successful, it must consider that, and it must provide practical training in order to help bridge that skills gap. The second gap that we see reported is around social support, particularly for veterans moving from a service environment into post-secondary education. We see that very often their experience, where they are at in terms of their personal transition, their lifestyle is quite different from the environment of other people around them in that context. Providing the appropriate supports so that their needs can be met, so that they can have a place where they can interact with peers and receive social support is going to be critical to the success of those education and employment programs. So with that, thank you again for the opportunity to present, and welcome your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Thorne, and thank you to all of you. And also thank you for the work that you are doing for veterans. And I'd like to, on behalf of the committee, to say thank you to your service, Mr. Wall et Monsieur Tivierge, c'est ici. Now we're going to start the round of questions of 6 minutes, and I'm pleased to start with Mrs. Kathy Wagenthal for 6 minutes, please.
Thank you, Chair. And I do thank you for your service, Mr. Wall and Mr. Tivierge. Thank you so much. I'll start with you, if that's fine. I really am curious about your program. I see that you are partnered with Veterans Affairs, Soldiers On, and Multiple Faith Housing Initiative here in Ottawa, which I think is wonderful. You mentioned about the problem with the public service and how there's a limited scope, it seems, of employed veterans within VAC itself. And just recently, the Public Service Commission indicated that, and they're responsible for administering the hiring priorities within the public service, that only 330 appointments out of 64,796 hires in 2021 and 2022 were veterans. That's less than 0.5%. So I'm curious about, you indicated you're doing a lot of preparation, a lot of work's been done to build strong and enduring relationships, a number of initiatives have been developed. Can you tell me, are you indicating then that the City of Ottawa Veterans Task Force has articulated these initiatives and that you have them available in writing?
Okay, so our working group, our second career working group is kind of initiating a relationship, particularly with the Human Resource Department. And I think that's going to be a vast initiative, because our focus now is to get to the private enterprise. But the thing is, the public sector, we will get to the public sector definitely. And
That's what I wanted to hear. Thank you.
Yes.
So human resources within the public sector should also be able to take advantage of the things that you are working on and learning here. And those will be transferred over to make sure that those human resources departments have access to these same things that highlight the needs of veterans. Is that right?
Yes, so it is in the working plan to get to the public sector, but really the focus, rather than going like to the CEOs of the company, it's much more advantageous to go with the HR, because they are those who write the policy, they are those who are in charge of the recruitment, and this is really where we can influence.
Really pleased to hear that.
Yes.
So as you're working, are there documents that will become available to indicate the successes that you're having? I'm thinking of other communities as well that really need to incorporate this type of thing where they want to be an asset to veterans who are looking for employment.
Well, where we are more advanced in the process, there will be eventually a document. We are starting with notes from the meeting, from the roundtable that we are doing, but eventually that would translate with the documents once we have sufficient material and tangible recommendation.
Thank you very much. I just have one question for you, Mr. Thorne. I see that you indicate that although you receive grants to enable the growth of the program, the Veterans Transition Network would remain an independent organization. Do you see that as a positive thing in being more effective with the veterans that you work with, and why so?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for the question. I think that, so if I understand correctly, you're referring specifically to sort of the breakdown of funding between a government and private. Is that correct?
Mm-hmm.
Well, so we are a registered service provider for Veterans Affairs Canada. We have been for almost a decade now. So what that means is that for veterans with an eligible claim, they can attend our program and have those costs covered by Veterans Affairs. I would say that 30 to 50% of the veterans who access our program do not have a claim with Veterans Affairs. For whatever reason, our organization is engaging with a segment of the veteran population that has either been unable or unwilling to access service from Veterans Affairs. So I would say it is partly a necessity. It is partly by design that we seek charitable funding to support those veterans, because we never turn them away. They're always put through the program at no cost. But it's also a growing necessity because although we're a registered service provider, we have seen the rate of approval for veterans who are eligible, but we have seen that rate of approval drop drastically, in particularly over the past 3 years. So the number of veterans that are eligible to be funded by Veterans Affairs, they have the correct claim, but that paperwork is not being completed, and we are unfortunately not receiving those funds. But as a matter of policy, we'll never turn them away. And so we have to then lean on our charitable funding in order to ensure that they get the program.
Perfect. Okay, thank you so much, and thank you for doing that. I'd like to cede the last minute and a half or so. Sorry, Terry, to Terry.
Okay, no problem. Thank you for being here today. I guess just one question. Really, the strategy, it's for veterans who struggle the most is a lot of the concern that we hear. Probably the most shocking thing I've heard since I've been here is how many don't have homes, and you're not going to get a job if you don't have a place to live. So has there ever been thought from any organizations that the government they seem to work in silos here, that work with employers to perhaps have some type of home solution with some companies? Like in my riding, they can't get employees they're doing it now for tourism as an example, where they're going to build it. And I would think people perhaps that came out of the armed forces may be used to having people around that it actually might work well as well. I just didn't know if anyone has that as part of their strategy. Okay.
To who your question?
Any one of them. Has there ever been a thought that you had a wage subsidy as an example here of helping out? Do we have something that you could tie into companies?
In 20 seconds, please.
Yeah, there. Give you a quick example that does take place out here in Alberta. ATCO, as an example, has set up the transition villages for veterans, which is an excellent program. The biggest issue that you run into with housing, and I know that has the same thing, a lot of veterans do not understand what they qualify for because there are so many different understandings of what a veteran is. Sorry.
Thank you, Mr. Wall. And now let's go to Mrs. Richie Valdez for 6 minutes or less. Please, go ahead.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to the witnesses that have joined, and a special thanks to those that have served our country. Through you, Mr. Chair, I'll ask my first question to Mr. Thiveridge. In your opening, you mentioned how veterans have mental health challenges or different veteran stigmas. Can you offer recommendations for the employment strategy so this can be addressed?
Thank you, Mr. President. Some strategy. It's first of all, there's kind of a misconception of the mental health problem. So the stigma that we're talking about is like most of veterans, most of the military members who are getting out of the forces have some mental health problem, which is not exactly the truth. The vast majority of members, when they get out, even those who serve in many missions, they don't have mental health problems. Some of them have, and definitely in terms of strategy, it's it is, in fact, it is important before going to a strategy. It is important to understand really, to have that open discussion with the different employers about understanding their perception of what they have about mental health problem. But some of them don't need accommodation, but some of them also, as we are enlarging our programs, many of them are fully employable, but in terms of strategy, I think this is has to be an ongoing dialogue between the veteran support ecosystem and the community of the employers.
Thank you. And the next question I have is more around, when you work with veterans, what are their top concerns with finding employment?
Well, first, myself, I don't work directly with veterans, but I can only relate to my experience. But it's some of them, they simply want to change career, to do something different that they were. Like I relate to a friend of mine who got out, he became a sommelier. And some others, particularly in the National Capital area, it is a very interesting population because the population in National Capital are officers and senior NCOs. So many of them, they develop skills in the area of project management. So we will see them becoming an entrepreneur, developing their business in project management, and some other will be contracting with other firms to become project managers. But we have, again, some of them, they want to do something totally different as a second career, and some others, they want to pursue a little bit the skills that, particularly the newly skills that they have developed, because many service members, they go through academic upgrading, and when they have completed their diploma, they want to serve. They want to use their skills in different industries.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And so over to you, Mr. Thorne. You had mentioned the cultural transition and you touched on the skills gaps or social supports. Can you provide additional context that you didn't get a chance to mention in your opening because you had a limited amount of time?
Yes, thank you for the question. I think, in particular, to perhaps highlight some examples of where I think this type of service is being provided. So out here in British Columbia, where our organization is headquartered, there's two organizations immediately that spring to mind. So the first is the Institute for Veterans Education and Transition, also called IVET. It's based at the University of British Columbia. And it is a specialized program that is the aim of which essentially is to make the UBC a veterans-friendly campus. So the idea being that for those who are leaving the military and accessing the education and training benefits, that they can go through this program, receive academic credit for some of their experience and service in the military, and essentially move along a fast track towards certificates. Really, the idea here is that it's an opportunity for people to engage with post-secondary education, but have a wraparound peer support experience whereby they are embedded with a group of their peers. They can support one another in that context, which may be culturally quite different from their experience in the military. And the idea here is to sort of increase the rate of success and the rate of retention. There's a similar program at the BC Institute of Technology called the Legion Military Skills Conversion Program. There are other programs like this across Canada. But very much, I think that is what is needed because we see for many folks, and particularly if you look down in the United States, I think I'm out of time.
Thank you.
If you look down in the States, you can see that similar problems happen with the GI Bill, that people are leaving or not completing post-secondary education, not because they have issues with finance, but they have issues with cultural fit and retention.
Thank you, Mr. Thorne. Et maintenant, nous allons passer à Monsieur Luc.
Now, over to Luc Desilets for the next 6 minutes. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Thank you to our guests. Hello to my colleagues. Mr. Tiverge, earlier, you said that veterans were not attracted to salary. That's not what motivates them. It wasn't so much the conditions, but it's more, and that they're not interested in the social benefits per se. We know that their needs have more to do with, serving. They're interested in having a purpose. We're hearing that there is a 4.5% unemployment rate compared to 6.5% of the Quebec and Canadian population. Veterans, apparently, are more likely to self-report as being unsatisfied because they're not reaching their full potential. Can you unwrap that for me? So the unemployment rate would be low, and I don't have the right data, and yet they're attracted to jobs, but it just doesn't line up with their aspirations. Yes, thank you for the question, Mr. Chair. One thing that's important to understand is that when they're released, this military personnel are in their prime. They are at their best in terms of skills, and so they want challenges. For them, challenges aren't social benefits and a salary. They want to overcome a challenge, something that would be in line with what they did in the Canadian Forces. When you're in the forces, you often have very little resources, and you have to accomplish a mission, and the risks are high. Especially when you're in a leadership role, you're responsible for the lives of your fellow women and men who are serving with you. You're asked to accomplish a mission, and you have to call on your creativity. So when a veteran leaves the forces, they still function like that. What the veteran wants is a challenge. A veteran would be willing to accept a smaller salary. But success for that veteran, well, how do they define it? It's their ability to take on challenges. I hope I answered the question, Mr. Chair. Very well. That's very interesting. This is something that I hadn't fully understood before. You also referred earlier to the department. You said there are only 4% of employees who are veterans. And you seem to find that, interesting, just as we do. How can that be explained that there are so few veterans? Well, for me, it would be hard to explain it. We could make guesses. Is it about a change in culture within these departments that's required? Perhaps a change of culture. Perhaps the skills aren't being recognized, but this is purely an assumption. I don't want to take a stance on that. The other thing now, perhaps there are very few veterans who wish to pursue a career in this area. So we're trying to look on both sides. Mr. Chair, I don't have concrete data on this, but I thank you for the question because it is an interesting one. Why would veterans not be interested in a job within the department? I mean, going to work in the private sector is a whole other world and have to change challenges, but there are challenges at the department, at the Veterans Affairs Department. Well, I'd like to be able to answer that question. But your eyes are speaking to me, but I'm not understanding everything. Well, maybe one way to answer that question is by saying that it's important to understand what the relationship is between a veteran and the department. Perhaps that could explain things. I don't really have an answer. I have hypotheses and ideas where we could go get the answers. It's important to really focus on the department and their recruitment strategy, their perception of veteran skills. Very interesting. It's also possible that veterans just have no interest whatsoever in administrative tasks, and I can understand that. Perhaps. Well, in any case, you should speak more freely. That would be useful. No, I just say that because we're trying to make recommendations. These are things that could help us. We all want to have a lot of veterans working in the department. We really do. And yet that rate of employment is very low. And so it's hard to understand. Do I still have time? No, I don't have any more time. So I thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Desilets. Now we will go over to Ms. Rachel Blaney for the next 6 minutes, please. Go ahead.
Chair, and I thank all of you for testifying today in front of this committee. My first question will, of course, go to Mr. Tilliège. First of all, I just want to thank you for your many years of service, and thank you for having that service already to this country and then continuing this important work in Ottawa. I think that's very commendable, and I appreciate you working so hard to make it a friendlier place for the people who have served us. I guess my first question, and we heard this really clearly in the testimony last week, is one of the biggest challenges is that when a military personnel leaves the military and moves into the veteran stage of their life, there is not a document that meaningfully explains the amount of training and knowledge that they have in a way that the civilian world can understand. So we heard veterans who talked about leaving the service and then having to be retrained in things they were already experts in, simply because that translation of those amazing skills are not able to be carried into the civilian world. I'm just wondering if you have any feedback or thought on how we could make that a little bit different and better for veterans.
In the past, many years in the past, there have been a lot of effort towards recognizing the skills, competencies, and training of military members. I can refer many years ago to the military civilian training accreditation program, which were at that time the genesis of the PLAR initiative. Over the last years, I know that the transition group, the different organization within the forces, they put together a catalog of skills and competency that it's like a dictionary to understand. It's kind of a catalog of the skills that are being recognized in the civilian world, and the equivalent in terms of what level of training they are and what it does correspond in a civilian trade, for example. But it's still a challenge quite a bit because, again, there's some misconception about the military training, and that's why in terms of solution, again, this is important to have that continuous dialogue in order to better understand how those skills as competency are transferable to the civilian world. And sometimes, a lot of times, it's with the private enterprise, the small and private enterprise, and this is with that dialogue, with that community, that will help to better understand how those skills are transferable. And on the other way around is to have the members initiating a transition, how this person can translate the skills in a language that can be understood by the employer community.
Well, sorry, I keep fighting with the interpreters. I don't mean to. Yeah. I guess, one of the things that you mentioned through the chair, of course, in your testimony is that fact that there's stigma about veterans, and often overcoming that can be a challenge. And you talked about working with the private sector to help them understand the realities of the huge asset it actually is to hire a veteran. So I'm just wondering, when we look at this study, do you think it would be appropriate for VAC to take a more active role in educating employers of the assets that veterans bring?
Certainly, VAC, in fact, would have advantage to work with the Canadian Armed Forces transition units. We call them the CAFTUs in our jargon. So the CAFTUs basically are those, they play a very important role in preparing the veteran, the transitioning members to a second career. In fact, they are the service provider, they are the expert, and the thing is, one of the challenge is to get to the community in order to kind of dispel those myths. So, like my working group in the second career are beginning to do that work. In fact, they want to understand where those stigmas are coming from and how they can demystify those stigmas. And also, it will be done as well as the transitioning members who have their own stigmas about the employers. I think that with that by understanding where they are coming from, that will be very helpful in preparing the military member to a second career, and also for the employers to better understand. And sometimes what we would like, if we were in a perfect world, they will kind of harmonize their recruiting policies with what the veteran can offer.
And when I hear you speak of that, it seems to me is that instead of having sort of a broad approach for the whole country, it might make sense to have a more regional and personalized approach across Canada. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Oh, absolutely, because each committee you have their own culture. They have a number of employers. They have a certain industry, and that industry carries a culture. So it's something that has to be done by each transition unit. That could be a good project. That could be a good collective project that could be done. The thing is, you have to engage also the business community to do that. So this is really the biggest challenge, is to engage the community and also to keep that, to develop the partnership and to keep that communication continuous. And so I think it's this way a lot of progress could be accomplished.
Thank you, Ms. Blenay. And now we're going to start a second round of questions, and 6 members will be able to ask questions. And I'm pleased to start with Mr. Fraser Tolmie for 5 minutes, please.
Point of order, Mr. Chair?
Yes, Mr. Richards.
On a point of order, just obviously we got started about 20 minutes late with votes and various other things. You know, we're sort of at that midway point. If we had started on time, just wanted to get your sense as to what our plans were, because we've got a second panel. When would we start that second panel? When would we conclude the second panel?
Okay, well, we have 2 hours for that committee, and the first panel, it's 1 hour and 1 hour, so we start at exactly at 3:50, so we're allowed to go until 5:50. So we'll have our 2 hours meeting.
Thanks.
You're welcome. So let me stop. And Mr. Tolmie, go ahead, please. 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Thorne, I just wanted to get your thoughts. You know, when I released from the military, I believe I had a day-long seminar with Veterans Affairs about benefits. And I'm thinking along my lines here that, you know, someone that's been in the military for 15 years, 20 years, 25 years, that a day-long seminar is not going to cut it. We've been hearing that veterans have a resume that probably needs to be translated into the civilian world and maybe help integrate. So what are your thoughts on being able to assist veterans more than just like a day-long seminar, as I said? And maybe I'm wrong, but that's what I recall. I think it was like a day-long, and we got sandwiches, and then you were on your way, and goodbye. You were you were told what you could access, but you were never given the tools at that seminar. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, absolutely. I would entirely agree with that statement that you know, a day is insufficient. My understanding is that with the establishment of the CAF transition group, that those services will be occurring.
Excuse me, Mr. Thorne.
L'interprète nous dit que the interpreter is saying that the quality of sound is insufficient.
Equipment, and we have little problem with the sound. Can you speak louder and try to maybe keep the microphone? Let's try again. And if not, yeah. So please go ahead, Mr. Tom.
Okay, I'll try this again and I'll speak more loudly and slowly and see if that helps things. But yes, absolutely. I agree with the statement that a day certainly is not enough.
No, Mr. Thorne. Yeah, no, not again, but could you keep the microphone with your finger during you, while you speak, please? And let's try one more time because we have a problem for interpreters. So let's try again, please.
I'll try this once more with the mic a little bit closer. Hopefully that's helpful. Yes, a day is not enough. My understanding is that the CAF transition group is going to provide services that will be occurring throughout the service cycle of the member. So beginning during service and certainly ramping up as they prepare to release. But I think you touched on 2 points. One, that information needs to be provided multiple times, I think, over a longer period of time in order for it to sink in. Again, this relates directly to accessibility, and for any other component that somebody would train for in the Canadian Armed Forces, a PowerPoint would not be enough. You would learn that information, but then you would practice rehearsing it. You would practice applying it. And I think the same is true of the communication skills, the translation of military to civilian relevant skills, all of those pieces that will be part of a successful transition. They must be rehearsed. They must be actively worked on by the member, both during and after service, in order for them to be successful.
Thank you. And a second question, do you agree that more veterans should be working for Veterans Affairs, and if so, why?
Absolutely. It's difficult to see how that could not be a positive thing. One of the pieces that part of the entire reason that my organization exists is that our program founders in the late 90s discovered that veterans were often not well served by many available civilian services because there was such a massive disconnect in terms of the understanding of experience and those who are providing the services. So to have veterans embedded in the department creates an immediate understanding between the service recipient and the person who is providing those services, should be providing those services. So I would see that to be a very positive thing. But to add to Mr. Tiviège's comments earlier, I think one of the major issues there is the relationship that veterans have with Veterans Affairs. I can only imagine that would discourage many of them from applying for jobs there.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Thorne, and keep going like this till the end, please. And now I'd like to invite Mr. Sean Casey for 5 minutes or less. Mr. Casey.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I'm going to pick up right where you left off with Mr. Thorne. I don't know if you were there at the time, but back when committees used to travel, I was a member of the Veterans Committee and had the honor of visiting your establishment there in Vancouver, along with the full committee. It was a memorable visit. It's apparent that your organization has come a long, long way since then, and for that I congratulate you. I'm going to start with this. There was a study done in 2019 called the Life After Service Study. And what it showed was that the largest post-release employer for veterans by far was the public service. What does that tell you, or what conclusion would you draw from the fact that, one, veterans are, after service, drawn to the public service and successful in large numbers in landing jobs within the public service?
Yeah, I think in order to really understand well the sort of what that metric is telling us, I think we would need a really accurate profile of who those folks are. So, the largest single employer, according to the study, being the public service. And I think Mr. Tevier spoke about this earlier, that we see that those who perhaps serve in commission roles, officers, are perhaps drawn to that work, have project management experience, experience working perhaps with levels of government that might give them a natural affinity for that work. So certainly, I think it's good to see, but often what's missing when we look at that data is, well, who's fallen through the cracks? I would certainly say, I don't have data in front of me to back this up, but I would be comfortable going out on a limb and saying that for those folks that I spoke about earlier who struggle in their transition, junior ranks, combat arms, deployment, Army, that from my experience, we don't see those folks in large numbers going into public service. So again, we really need to look at it. It's great that we see a group who are transitioning and transitioning well into public service, but we also need to look at who is slipping through the cracks.
Thank you. Over to Mr. Wall. Mr. Wall, in your opening remarks, you mentioned that two things that would be helpful would be a wage subsidy for the hiring of veterans and some sort of a program which helps identify veterans. I just want to pick up on the first one, if I might, and I'm going to refer back to that study that was done in 2019. Right now, the current rate of unemployment in Canada is about 6.6%. The current unemployment rate among veterans is about 4.6%. So as compared to the general population, the data indicates that they're doing better in terms of being employed. The other thing that the study indicated was that post-release, there is about 3 years where, on average, 3 years where they take a reduction in income, but then their income steadily rises until about the 10th year. So that's what the data says. I guess I would, given that data, how would you square that with the necessity for a wage subsidy?
Well, what we're looking at on with the idea of a wage subsidy is more about encouraging employers to go out and hire veterans in certain areas. So there is trepidation within the public sector to say, okay, private sector, sorry, to hire veterans. Is there some issue? What's that we may come across? How can we fit this person in? Is there an advantage to hiring a veteran versus someone else that's out there applying? And I think that's the point that we're getting at. Some of the veterans that are having the hardest time finding employment are the ones that need as much encouragement to be hired. And I think that's what we're trying to work on, is say, how do we get these folks transitioning into the private sector?
Thank you, Mr. Kissy. Et maintenant, nous allons passer à...
Now over to Mr. Desilets for 2.5 minutes. Over to you. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Thorne, you said, just like Mr. Tiverge did, that the number of employees at the department is quite low, about 4%. In your opinion, Mr. Thorne, first to you and then Mr. Tiverge afterwards, do you think that it would be good to have a policy with specific hiring requirements? There was a position for a rector in a university, and there were a lot of aspects mentioned, and then the list was narrowed down. Would it be possible to have something similar where there's a hiring policy that would really favor hiring veterans at the department? Mr. Thorne, please go ahead.
Certainly, I think that's, should we say, perhaps a hiring drive or an effort by Veterans Affairs to hire more veterans, I think would be a very positive thing. I would be cautious about perhaps an exact target that has to be hit. trying to get human beings to fit into neat boxes of numbers is sometimes a difficult thing and not always productive. But I very much think that by Veterans Affairs attempting to working towards developing policies to be a more attractive employer for veterans and to bring them in, I think would be a very positive thing for the department and for veterans.
Merci. Si vous avez une réponse rapide, M. Tifierge, là-dessus.
Thank you, Mr. Tivierge. If you have a quick answer to that, I have another question for you. Yes, I agree with Mr. Thorne's recommendation. Essentially, there are policies for visible minorities and for people with disabilities, but not for veterans. That answers my question perfectly. Mr. Tivierge, you're proposing putting in place tax incentives for SMEs. Are there other countries doing that? Is the idea making ground? Is the minister aware or the department aware? No, they're not aware. This is an incentive that is worth studying. What would be interesting is to look at the initiatives from that are used by our neighbors in the South, the U.S. I don't know all the details, but I think it would be worthwhile to go see what research is being done on those initiatives. But when we talk about SMEs, one option worth studying, especially for SMEs, and that's because they represent most of the employers, what incentives could be put in place? For example, it could be provincial tax credits or a federal tax credit. Thank you very much, Mr. Tivierge. It could even be at the municipal level. Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Tivierge. We're now going over to Rachel Blaney for 2.5 minutes.
Okay. Thank you, Chair. And I'm going to come back to you, Mr. Tivierge. And I just have a couple more questions. We've seen from the research that the veterans that are falling behind in terms of employment after service are newer veterans who did not serve as long, women veterans, and medically released veterans. And I think that's shameful that we don't have a good strategy to support these particular groups having the best experience after their service. So I'm just wondering if you have any thoughts on that and what actions that we may recommend to VAC to address these issues more wholesomely.
Many of the members who release early in their career, sometimes it is for for reason other than voluntary. For example, the medicals. What is important to understand that those who are releasing for medical reason, they have to deal with also their health barriers. So, and also particularly if they are released for mental health, they have to deal also with the stigma associated with that. So if we refer to the Maslow chain, before getting an employment, they need to deal with their health problems. And some members who retired for non-medical reasons, some of them, they haven't built up on the experience. They have built up on the experience maybe to give them as much credibility. So they require sometimes more preparation. And the thing is, when you serve for a couple of years, just a couple of years in the Canadian Armed Forces, you don't have time to go on academic upgrading. And sometimes you don't think that, I will get out of the forces. When it is a non-voluntary release, a lot of time that you aren't prepared for that, so that makes that person more vulnerable.
Well, and I saw you nodding to Mr. Thorne's response on how it would be so amazing to have veterans actually providing services at VAC. And I'm just wondering, do you have any insight on why that pathway doesn't seem to be as clear so that we have more veterans doing that important work?
The thing is, what we need to do is to better understand the perception of the members with regards to VAC. So, I think that we have to go in depth. So I hope that research will tackle that because it is a very important issue, and sometimes that can hurt those perceptions can hurt the credibility of VAC. Mm-hmm. But the thing, I agree that more service members with experience who have dealt with military members should be part of VAC. The case manager, I found very amazing case manager, but the thing is, a veteran wonder.
Sorry, Mr.
May I continue, Mr. President?
A few words.
Okay. A veteran only wants to talk to a veteran to talk about these issues. A veteran who have experienced the same issues.
Thank you. We'll have two.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Je vous en prie, Monsieur Tivierge. Nous allons avoir deux.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you. We're going to have two short speakers. First, we are going to have Mr. First we'll have Terry and then Churence Rogers. Terry Dowdle, you have 2 minutes.
Chair, I was quite interested in the beginning testimony from Mr. Tivierge when he said lack of ability to source veterans, and we can only help the people we can find. So what could we do to actually improve on that? Like, how do we source more veterans?
Sorry, I'm not sure I understood exactly your question, sir, Mr. President.
Okay, so in your opening testimony, you said there's a lack of ability to source veterans. So how do we improve the ability to source the veterans?
To source the veteran, you mean to attract them, the veterans? Certainly, well, we look at career fairs. They can be a very effective way, but also is to create some opportunities for the employers to meet directly with the veterans, and also how we can educate each other. Certainly educate each other. Those forum discussions take place now on CAF Transition Unit, and the CAF Transition Unit are the perfect forum in order to start that, to have those exchange, that communication between the employers, and it's a more personable approach as well.
Okay, and then just one other thought. I was on National Defense before, and when we talk, these individuals that come out, they're used to working with other people and really goal-orientated in how they want jobs. Is there any thought or push to having like two type of forces that help out locally or here in Canada, whether it's flooding or things of that nature, that they could be utilized in that light?
So I'm not sure I understood your question, Mr. President.
So often, like as an example, when we were in seniors' homes or whatever, they got the military to step in. It leaves us short other places in the world. So I just didn't know if there was a thought process with the government to have an emergency task force, if that's something that you would think for these individuals that are used to working, they're goal-orientated.
Well, I haven't heard any of that. I didn't, never heard any of that. Certainly, it's something that.
Thank you, Mr. Dardel. And now let's go to Mr. Churence Rogers for 2 minutes, please.
Thank you, Chair. Welcome to our guest. And given the very restricted time, Veterans Staffing Canada, first of all, Mr. Wall, what are the biggest stigmas you've found veterans face when applying for jobs? And how can we better tackle these to help veterans avoid discrimination?
I think the biggest hurdle is an understanding of what they're capable of and what they should be applying for. Right when they get out, I guess the easiest way is if we're back to when I got out, I turned my kid in, got a pat on the back, and 6-9 months later, I got a middle envelope that said, "Hey, this is your service record." A lot has changed. The only way to improve it is to help, on one side, work with the veterans to understand where they are, help them with the resume writing, help them with interview prep, get them out there so they know where they can fit in. To avoid the stigma from discrimination, it's hard. With any sort of discrimination, it's hard to overcome that. And I think that's where, when we talked about earlier, was trying to come up with ways to get them in front of employers with having access to a website or something where they register and have their profiles built. So those organizations that really want to hire these veterans can actually get out there and do that.
Mr. Thorne, Do you find that veterans are generally aware of the Government of Canada's Veterans Job Bank that, as of today, had 19,034 job postings available?
I would have to say, in my experience, no. I've heard limited awareness about that resource among the folks that we're working with specifically. Now, I have to caveat that with a couple of things. Firstly, I don't interact often directly with our veteran clients. My work within the organization is largely strategic. But in addition to that, the folks that we are working with are those who are struggling most significantly in their transition in mental health. And again, often we're working to get them through that to a point of employment readiness. So it could also be a function of the fact that the folks we're working with are looking directly at employment often at that time.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Thorne. And that's the end of this panel. And I'd like to remind members that we have an hour for each panel, but depending on how many witnesses that do we have with opening statement and technical problems and also the witnesses are pleased to let them complete the sentences. So concerning our routine motion, the first round of 6 minutes, it's clear, but the second round, I have to deal with the time in order to stay in the 1 hour. So right now, I'd like to please our witnesses for their remarks, for their inputs today. And je commence avec Monsieur.
I'll start with Mr. André Tiverge
from the City of Ottawa Veterans Task Force, and also from Veteran Staffing Canada, Mr. Jason Wall, founder and director on the web, and also Mr. Oliver Thorne from Veterans Transition Network, executive director. So thank you so much for your participation, et je suspends le temps d'accueillir les nouveaux.
I will suspend a few moments just to greet the next witnesses. Thank you.
I'll proceed to the second panel of witnesses. A quick reminder to our witnesses that before speaking, please wait until I recognize you by name. And when speaking, please speak slowly and clearly. And now I would like to welcome our witnesses. We have from Challenge Factory, Miss Lisa Taylor, President. Et de Quatre Chemins, nous avons Madame.
And from Quatre Chemins, Cassandra Poudrier, Executive Director.
Minutes for your opening remarks, and I start with Miss Taylor. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, for asking me to be here. It's time Canada had a national strategy for veteran employment after service. As this is the first time I'm appearing before you, I'll take a minute to introduce Challenge Factory. Challenge Factory is a research agency and workforce consultancy focused on the future of work. We have worked across North America, in Singapore, Norway, and with career practitioners and policy analysts from more than 32 countries. As a certified B Corporation, we are audited by an international body for the impact our work has on employees, communities, suppliers, governance, and the environment, and our audit report is available on a public website. The process is rigorous. Only 665 out of almost 1.5 million organizations in Canada are B Corps. We focus on using business as a force for good and advancing the UN Sustainable Development Goals. For more than 10 years, Challenge Factory's research, consulting, and training has been supporting veterans, raising awareness about the benefits of hiring veterans, giving employers tools to make hiring easier, and drawing on veterans' knowledge to make sure that we get it right. Our research study on veteran workplace characteristics profiled veteran employees and quantified employer bias in Canada. We have published the Canadian Guide to Hiring Veterans, developed an employer online masterclass to create veteran-ready workplaces, and produced the Hidden Talent podcast, where veterans and employers discuss the challenges of post-service career transitions and employment from both sides of the interview table. These resources are publicly available thanks to the support of the Veteran and Family Wellbeing Fund. Personally, I am proud to sit on the Canadian Special Operations Regiment Association Board. My comments will focus on Challenge Factory's area of expertise, the formal field of career development within a changing labour market. We have 3 recommendations for this committee to consider. 1, use a career development model and adhere to the National Competency Framework for Career Development Professionals in your strategy. 2, focus on equipping veterans with career ownership rather than identifying specific jobs for them. And 3, make it easier for small to medium-sized enterprises in the private and nonprofit sectors to hire veterans. Career transitions always impact identity and sense of self. For veterans, the impact on identity is more extreme. Career development offers the intersectional frameworks needed to support veterans in this transition. You already know that for many veterans, finding a job is not the challenge, but many struggle to find purpose and a meaningful career that does not include chronic underemployment and job hopping. Career development is about more than jobs and training programs, and it is the cornerstone for successful strategies in addressing identity-based transitions. Recommending veterans into specific jobs is not sound career development. It doesn't put the veteran at the center, and it sets them up with a weak foundation for solving future career challenges, despite veterans having great skills. Direct job matching from military to civilian environments has led us to today, when veterans transition with an initial awareness of exactly 4 types of work: public sector, as if that's a singular job, security, coding and cyber, and starting a business. Job satisfaction and retention involves how roles and organizational culture align with personal motivation and reward. For example, a veteran may have the skills for security work, but the reason they thrived in the military, where they learned those skills, was because of the camaraderie, collective understanding of mission, and continued opportunity to learn. These key elements may not be present in the civilian job market. Which brings me to the labor demand side of the equation. 90% of Canadians who work in the private sector do so within SMEs, not large companies often involved in consultations. Small businesses do not know how to find, hire, or retain veterans, and veterans do not know what small businesses do, nor how to find jobs or what can be offered. According to the OECD, Canada has underutilized, overlooked, yet high-quality adult career services. Lifelong career engagement for veterans is a defined and solvable problem. And done well, this strategy can demonstrate how we can get career services right for all Canadians. In summary, we offer these 3 recommendations. Use career development models and competency frameworks. Focus on equipping veterans with lifelong career ownership, and make it easier for small and medium-sized enterprises to hire veterans. Thank you, and I welcome your questions.
Thank you so much, Ms. Taylor. And maintenant, nous allons passer à Madame Poudrier.
We'll now go over to Ms. Poudrier for the next 5 minutes or less. Go ahead, please. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for taking the time to hear and consider the different perspectives of stakeholders. In thinking about this speech, I took the time to talk with my colleagues and the veterans we serve, both women and men. It was important for me to share our observations with you with the intention of contributing to the reflection on the potential creation of a national employment strategy for veterans. Since this is the first time that I am presenting before you, I will introduce you to our organization. Quatre Chemins is a non-profit organization whose mission is to transform the transition experience of people from performance-based environments, such as sports, high-level sports, military, business, and performing arts. We aspire to a society where each person lives in alignment with their true nature, a society where we have learned to redefine ourselves beyond our uniforms and accomplishments. For 1 year, we support these people, including athletes, veterans, entrepreneurs, people from the business community, in their transition process. We spend about 60 hours of listening to them and supporting them in their search for identity. It is therefore in this position of privileged observer that I am sharing with you the following observations regarding veterans' experiences. The first element that we believe is very important, that whether it be for medical or non-medical reasons, the impact on a person after they are released leads to having a direct impact on their self-esteem, and it's difficult for them to engage in their career shift outside of the forces. For a number of veterans, the questioning of their identity, as well as the feeling of abandonment, led to them losing their footing, feeling like their world is turned upside down. Consequently, many of them accept jobs only to change jobs a few months later. It is therefore essential to continue to address the notion of identity in the transition process when we talk about employability, since this is directly linked to the psychosocial capacity of a person to invest in his or her next life cycle. It's difficult to invest in a project, a job, or even in one's family when we're no longer able to recognize our own value without the uniform. We should also be open to the notion that this support doesn't have to be offered only for the military by the military. Take the example of a sergeant major, 22nd Regiment, 34 years of service, who we are supporting. 2 weeks ago, he took it upon himself to call a full civilian, a retired vice president of a Canadian bank, to talk to him about the real business of transition. This gives us a better idea of what it's like to live through a transition. Finally, one last point that was brought up to me is that when veterans are medically released from the forces and following the rehabilitation program, it is concluded that the person is unable to hold an equivalent civilian job, and he or she is in a diminished earning capacity and therefore will be compensated until the official retirement age. I want to tell you about Alain, a veteran of Bosnia. We supported him last year. This summer, I had found him a job within a business that we're supporting. And Alain's first question was, how many hours does the business need for me? And in the end, he found out that in the end, it was learned that they needed somebody full-time. But since Alain is a compensated veteran, he's limited to $20,000 of income. And so the company, which needed stable employees, was not able to accommodate Alain, who wanted to contribute, but who found himself in a position where he had to take into account this income, which would have an impact on him. And he couldn't take on that job because it would have a direct impact on him from a financial perspective. Now, the current belief among veterans is that working is more expensive, those who are receiving benefits, than not working. It's more expensive than not working. And so I would invite us to broaden the notion of employability, to open things up and ask ourselves what happens once a person is willing to start at the next stage of their life. Thank you very much for your time, Mr. Chair. Thank you very much, Ms. Poudrier. Thank you to both of you for your opening remarks. We're now going to start with the rounds of questions, 6 minutes for each member.
Mr. Blake Richards, first VP of the committee, for 6 minutes, please.
Well, first, I'd like to thank both of you and to our previous, I see at least one of our previous witnesses is still with us to listen in on this panel, and I want to thank all of you for excellent contributions in terms of your testimony and responses. To the two of you at the table currently, I look forward to being able to ask you questions, and I look forward to hearing other members of the committee be able to do so as well. But first, I do have to interrupt us for a minute with a motion that I'd like to move, and I just want to explain to the two of you, just so for your understanding, that as members of the committee, we only have opportunity to have the floor at this point in time in the meeting, and we get one opportunity, and so it's the only opportunity I have, and I do have to move the motion and interrupt for hopefully a very brief period of time. Hopefully there won't require a lot of debate or anything to move this motion and get it passed and carry on so we can come back to hear from you. So I just want to apologize to you and hope that I still will get those chance to ask you a question. But I'll just move this motion, which I did put on notice on February the 7th, that pursuant to Standing Order 1081A, the committee order that Veterans Affairs Canada provide, and if necessary, create a transcript of the recorded telephone conversation of July 21st, providing for the redaction of any personal information that would identify a veteran, referred to on page 230 of the documents submitted to the committee on January 26th of 2023, within 14 calendar days of the adoption of this motion. Now, I won't speak to this. I think it's pretty self-explanatory. We're all aware that we received package documents. There was a telephone conversation referred to in those, and it was a conversation that we were all kind of under the impression did not exist previously. So it's one that we all should have access to understanding what was part of that conversation, and to further our look into the matter that we were looking at, the documents were provided us for. And I just will point to members to one thing. I've clearly indicated we should redact any personal information that would identify a veteran, and that is also the reason why I've indicated we should receive a transcript rather than the recording itself, because we wouldn't want anything that might identify a veteran, so a transcript would make that easier, and that's I think it's pretty straightforward, and I hope we can move it. I've moved it, and hope we can carry through and pass it quite quickly so we can get back to our witnesses. So I'll leave it at that, and I move that motion.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Richards. So just to make sure on this motion, you said on January 26th, 2022 or 20?
Yeah, I guess I'll just ask. It appears as though in print it's been a typo or something there. It should be 2023. It was obviously this year we received those. I'll just ask. I don't think we have to actually amend it. I think we can just, as unanimous consent to the committee, to fix the typo to 2023.
Okay, thank you. Discussion, Mr. Casey.
No problem with correcting the typographical error. the suggestion that the committee didn't know of the existence of a recording is one that I do not accept. We did know that there was a call initiated by the veteran. There was a call initiated by the department. We knew that it was the policy of the department to record one of those types of calls. So the suggestion that this is somehow a surprise, I reject. However, I have no problem with the tenor of the motion. The only concern I have is with the limited scope of the redactions in the motion. So therefore, I would propose an amendment to expand what can be redacted. So my amendment would be as follows. To delete all of the words contained between parentheses and to add a sentence at the end of the motion that reads, furthermore, that Veterans Affairs Canada redact from the transcript any personal identifiable information of the veteran or Veterans Affairs employees and any personal medical information. So the purpose of the amendment is to ensure that the identity of the Veterans Affairs employees will not be divulged and that any personal medical information will not be divulged over and above the information that Mr. Richards has suggested should be redacted.
Thank you, Mr. Casey. So now we have an amendment on the floor. So discussions. Mr. Richards, and after Mr. Desilets.
I'll let Mr. Desilets. I didn't put my hand up, so
Okay,
I'll let him
Mr.
go.
Desilets, please go ahead.
Ça va vous donner le temps de réfléchir. Moi,
It will give you some time to think. I don't have a problem either with the motion or the amendment. My problem, I want to mention, Mr. Chair, I mentioned it last week or the week prior, is that in the way we do things, while we're interrupting witnesses that we have here with us, and we're debating subjects that do not concern our guests. I was told that it wasn't possible, 2 weeks ago I was told this, and what I understand it that if there was unanimous consent around the table, it could be said, yes, the Conservatives are going to table a motion today, but the motion will be tabled, for example, I'm just giving an example, 10 minutes before the end of the session. That way, we can let our witnesses go. They can be let go and we can discuss among ourselves and settle our issues between ourselves. If there was the consent of everyone around the table, we could proceed this way. And personally, I think that this would be much more functional and respectful. And I'm not targeting my Conservative colleague. It might have happened at other times as well, but I'm just talking about the way we proceed in general. Thank you very much, Mr. Desilets. Thank you for your comments. Just to let you know, well, you know this, but it's in the rules. Members are allowed to proceed as such, and any member is allowed to call for the adjournment of the discussion as well, so that we go back to our witnesses. That is what the rules allow us to do. If anyone else would like to speak to the amendment, Mr. Richards.
The spirit of what Mr. Casey is suggesting, I would be supportive of. I have no trouble with the idea, of course, of not providing the personal information that would identify the employee as well, despite the fact that it could potentially be an employee who, did something inappropriate. I'm comfortable with that. The last part of that amendment deals with medical information. I think we would have to find a way to indicate that it would be medical information that would identify an individual. And the reason I would indicate that is because there's something like that. It comes down to a matter of how the department chooses to interpret it. They could choose to interpret that to mean leave out anything about the subject of medical assistance in dying, because you could indicate that is medical information. Now that is the subject matter that we're talking about. It would then therefore redact anything that would be useful to this committee. And I don't think that was Mr. Casey's intention, but I think it could be interpreted that way by someone if they chose to interpret it that way. So I think we need to find a little clearer way to word that. That would indicate that it would be, perhaps it would be providing further redaction of any information, including medical information that would identify a veteran or I forget the wording you used for a Veterans Affairs employee. And I just think that way it can't be interpreted so broadly that it has to leave out any useful information to the committee.
Mr. Casey.
I may want to get the advice of the clerk on this, but it's my understanding that when a committee sends for documents, there actually is a formal and established process by which to determine whether the redactions are reasonable. And so there's a separate process to challenge what's in the redactions and to have a judgment made. It's my understanding that does exist, and I think that would provide the safeguard that Mr. Richards is looking for.
Let's see if the... Wait. Mr. Casey, first of all, we would like you to repeat again your intervention, and the clerk will consult during the time to be able to answer your question. Please say it again.
It's my understanding that included in a committee's power to order documents, that there is a review process to determine the appropriateness of the level of redaction chosen by the party producing the documents. So because there is a process to say that the documents have been over-redacted, because there is a process that we can rely on, that should provide the safeguard that Mr. Richards requires to ensure that the documents aren't all black.
Chair, he's busy. Chair? Excuse me, Chair?
Well,
can I intervene or?
Yeah, okay. Please, Mrs. Wagenthal.
Yeah, I would just like clarity on the amendment.
Mm-hmm.
When we say any medical information, what medical information would identify a veteran? Specifically, a specific veteran. Doctors, I can't imagine any diagnosis or anything like that that would directly identify a veteran. So what exactly are you referring to there, Mr. Casey?
Most of the time it's not the medication, but the number of veterans that's involved. So if it's a small number, it can be linked.
This Medicaid owned.
Question is directed to Mr. Casey.
Yes.
The wording that I've proposed indicates that any personal medical information should be removed from the transcript. So whatever is personal to the veteran should not be for public consumption.
To clarify there, where veterans have a problem is not with information about medical conditions being released, but their name being released along with it, exposing their condition, which this motion clearly does not do.
Et je peux répondre à l'intervention de Monsieur.
I can speak to what Mr. Casey said. Here's the situation. Once the redacted documents have arrived, it's up to the committee to decide, has too much been redacted in the document. If, however, the committee decides that the document is to be reviewed and additional information needs to be added, we can ask the legal officer to advise us and come up with a new document. Mr. Richards.
Ask Mr. Casey to, through you, Chair, to repeat the amendment. I sort of, I think I share the same sentiment that Ms. Wagenthal just indicated, where I think if we can, medical information that would identify someone, of course, should be redacted. But if it's simply, an indication of some kind of medical information that would not identify someone, I don't know that it's necessarily something that needs to be redacted. Maybe if you could repeat it and we could see if we could come to something that works for everybody here.
The amendment is to delete all the words contained in parentheses and to add the following sentence at the end of the motion. Furthermore, that Veterans Affairs Canada redact from the transcript any personal identifiable information of the veteran or Veterans Affairs employees and any personal medical information.
Any other interventions? Mr. Richards and then Mrs. Wagenthal. Mr. Richards.
Yeah, I think if we were to add the words at the end of that something along the lines of "and any personal medical information that would identify a veteran," that would probably be. I think it's within the spirit of what Mr. Casey's trying to suggest, and I think it would certainly make me feel more comfortable that we would not get a document that was so redacted that it wouldn't be useful to the committee. So that would be my suggestion as a sub-amendment, I suppose, unless it's considered a friendly amendment.
Before I go to Mr. Casey for the friendly amendment, I have Mrs. Wagenthal.
Yes, thank you, Chair. At this point in time, I would agree with my colleague, unless you can give me some idea of what that would be. It seems irrelevant here because we are obviously talking about veterans who have gone for assistance because of needing programs and services based on their medical conditions. So I don't see how this would identify them, but I would certainly agree with adding information that would identify a veteran, and then hopefully those who are doing the research. We all want to see something positive come out of this for the sake of our veterans.
See.
I really have nothing to add. I mean, there's no such thing as a friendly amendment. If my friend wants to offer a sub-amendment, that's within his power to do so. But that's the amendment that I've tabled. That's the amendment that I would like to have voted on.
Okay, great. Okay, it was at the same time, but Mr. Richards, yes.
Just indicating that I am in fact moving it as a sub-amendment.
This sub-amendment, can you read it or say what words?
Yeah, it would just simply add at the end of the amendment that would identify a veteran.
Okay. So we have a sub-amendment on the floor. Ms. Blaney, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you. So we're at 18 minutes. I think this is very interesting, and I just think that it's time to call the vote. So I move to call the vote. How's that?
Great. Perfect. So now we'll vote first of all on the sub-amendment. Okay, we're going to vote on the sub-amendment. Est-ce que le comité est d'accord?
Is the committee in agreement to adopt the sub-amendment as presented by Mr. Richards? Does anybody object to adopting the sub-amendment presented by Mr. Blake Richards? No indication, so the sub-amendment is adopted. And consequently, we don't need to deal with the modified amendment then? Okay. Now we'll move on to the amendment itself. Is the amendment as modified by the sub-amendment? In fact, does anybody object to adopting this amendment? No objection, so the amendment as modified is carried. There you go. On that note, we will continue on with our session. Oh, that's right. Pardon me. Before continuing, we do have to adopt the motion as amended. Does anybody object to adopting the motion as amended? No, then the motion carries. Thank you. Ladies, apologies for this inconvenience. Mr. Blake Richards had the floor at the time. We were doing our 6-minute turns. Given the time remaining, we will only have 4 minutes for each question. Mr. Richards, you had already used 1 minute, so you have 3 minutes left for your questions.
Thank you, and I do apologize again that we've interrupted some of the time that you would have been provided, and but we'll move as quickly as we can and get into some questions so that we can get as much information from you as you can. I do appreciate your presentations. Wanted to, probably the big thing I'd like to touch on with both of you is we've heard a lot in the last few meetings about the challenges that some veterans face over others. Those that are medically released, for example. Sometimes those who've been had a longer time in service, things like that, or even the ones with very short terms of service. That there can be some barriers there that they don't exist for maybe necessarily every veteran. I wondered if you could speak a little bit to those and to what services and supports are needed to help those veterans. And I guess what I'm talking was before they even get to employment services. There are often other services, rehab services, etc. What's needed there? What sort of are the gaps in what's provided now by Veterans Affairs, and what can be done better and different to make sure that we get veterans to a place where they can get to post military service, quicker and more successfully? I'm not sure who wants to start, but either one of you, if you'd like.
Through the chair, thank you for your question. And I think that it really touches on the intersectional nature of employment. I think that everybody comes at employment from different perspectives and has different capacity and challenge in order to be able to be engaged in their work. I think that the research is clear that there are groups that struggle more after release, but it also aligns with areas in the general Canadian population where we see challenges with employment and with career transition. And so that's where general frameworks and strategies that recognize that there are different groups that need to be treated differently should be a part of the strategy from the very beginning. In terms of the service that they receive, they need to start early, and they need to focus on how it's going to feel when they can no longer put their uniform on and introduce themselves with their rank and with their title. And that focus on who they are is the very beginning part, and that recognizes all of the different pieces of their identity, including their family status, where they want to live, what part of the country they're in, all of those kinds of things, in addition to gender, number of years of service, and medical status.
And maybe I'll just add on to that. What about the challenges with family members, spouses of veterans, because they sometimes face some of those same challenges you just talked about. Can you speak to that at all? Sure.
Yeah, I can go with that one. I think what's interesting too about identity and those challenges is to understand that the veteran doesn't live just by himself, right? It's a unit, and the unit is being affected by that change that's happening. So I think it's important to consider that the change does take a lot of time and a lot of work. So we have to consider that whatever strategy we put into place, we have to be patient and willing to take the time and resources to put that in place. So, what's really important is to accept that it's going to take time for those veterans and their family to go through that change process.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. And now I'd like to invite Mr. Daryl Sanson. 5 minutes, please. Oh, 4 minutes, sorry.
Okay. Merci beaucoup, and thank you both for your presentation. It's very important to have different voices with different research and experiences to come to the table and share some of the findings that you were able to share with us today. Maybe I'll start with Mrs. Taylor about the small businesses. You made the point that small businesses, there seems to be a gap. How can we improve that gap from what you've seen so far?
Yeah, thank you for the question through the chair. So the biggest gap that we have with small businesses is small businesses don't think about veterans. The average Canadian that's not connected to anyone who has service doesn't really think of veterans or our men and women that are serving. And so it's not that they necessarily have a bias one way or the other about hiring or not hiring veterans. They simply don't think about them. So the more that we can be raising awareness of this hidden talent pool, the better it will be in terms of being able to help with labor shortages that they are desperately trying to solve. And at the same time, on the veteran side, veterans don't know very much about small business either. They don't know what small businesses do, and they don't know what jobs are available there. They hear a lot about certain types of jobs, but not a lot about the rest of the full spectrum of where Canadians live and work.
Thank you for that, because I think that could be a focus point on that group, and there's a lot of work we could do. Madame Poudrier, c'est ça. Donc, vous avez fait référence à Alain qui vient.
You referred to Alain, who was looking for a part-time job. And you talked about the limitations with the income. According to what you've seen, would you say that there are a lot of people that are looking for jobs like this? Is that why there's a weakness in the hiring process? Thank you for the question through the chair. It's a very good question. How could I say it? Well, you need to go through several steps before you get to the stage of saying, okay, it's been a few years since my release. I feel good and I'm ready to invest in a new job. You have to take that into consideration first when we're thinking about these individuals. Next, what I would say is that for some people, they would like to get involved not so much for the money, but for the purpose that it will give them, because they'll be part of a project, whether that's a job within a small business or volunteering. What about recognizing this group of people who are looking for part-time jobs? Perhaps I have 1 minute left. Can you talk to us about your one-year program? You probably know that veterans who served for 6 years have up to $40,000 for training and education, and those who have 12 years get $80,000. Do you know that program? And is there a connection? Could there be a connection in order to improve the situation on both ends? Yes, that's a good question. And something easy that could be done is to open up this notion of training. Training is very limited in its definition because it says it has to lead to a diploma. So that limits people's access to that envelope of money. Having access to our services is another thing because you want to get prepared for your employability. And that's what we've been discussing for a few years now. How can we make sure that this fits within the parameters? When it comes to the government of Quebec, well, we're recognized as an educational institute, and we provide skills to people who want to return to the labor force. So we do have a support program that is technically over 13 months. It's several hours, and we focus on the identity aspect. Who am I without a uniform? Then we lead to the psychosocial aspects. We help them to, practice being in discussion with people, both other employees or family. Now, once the person has taken a step back, they think, well, how can I get involved? How and when do I say yes, and why? So that's what I would reply to that. Thank you very much, Ms. Poudrier. Now we're going to go over to our second vice chair, Mr. Luc Desilets. You have 4 minutes, please. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Thank you to our two guests, and a really sincere apologies for the time that we lost with you. Ms. Poudrier, who funds your organization? Thank you for the question through the chair. Our organization currently is financed by the Quebec Foundation of Veterans. They fund the services offered to women, mostly, because the amounts available are for that. We're also waiting to find out if the Veteran and Family Wellbeing Fund will accept to fund our one-year program. So we fund the services to veterans, so make sure that they don't have to pay out of pocket. They don't pay anything? No. So you take care of them for a full year, is that right? Yes. And throughout that, well, the identity process, I think that is really fascinating. But if at the end of the day, we want to prepare them adequately for the workforce, and they have to all pretty much work part-time, is that right? With that $20,000? Yes. What do you see as a solution to this? A change to the tax situation or special treatment for veterans? Well, I think the solution would be to open up the discussion, because for some veterans, they're satisfied with their current situation. And for others, on the contrary, they'd be open to doing something else without being limited, because currently the belief is that they'll be limited if they go to work, and so they're going to lose out. So opening up that conversation to find out what they're afraid of, because we've got veterans who told us, I stopped working because I was afraid that at one point VAC was going to say, he's able to work, so we're going to withdraw his benefits. So there needs to be a conversation around that. Could you please give me some examples of workshops? What kind of workshops do you run for them, and how many hours per week? So 5 hours per month, plus individual meetings and virtual meetings when needed. There's a theme for each meeting. At the beginning, we focus on getting to know oneself, and then we use tools like nonviolent communication and others. That allows people to get to know themselves better. Following that, what happens with a number of them is that, the uniform is a part of them, but it's not all of them. I see we don't have a lot of time left. I was a principal at school, like one of my colleagues, and we talk about recognizing prior learning or qualifications. Do you work with that notion with your people as well? Not for the moment, because our people have access to services in career orientation. So we really focus on the psychosocial aspect of the transition. We support them, and then we have partners that offer those services. So if somebody needs a career orientation counselor, they go out externally to get that? Yes. Yes, exactly. And then there's case managers and so on. Very interesting. Well, I went too quickly and I don't have any more questions left. I'll give it over to Ms. Blaney. Thank you, Mr. Desilets. Thank you for your kindness. Ms. Blaney, you have the floor for 4 minutes.
I didn't get the extra 30 seconds. I accept that. Ms. Taylor, if I could come to you first. I saw that you had created the Canadian Guide to Hiring Veterans. I guess I'm just trying to understand how this tool is used. Is it given out to employers? You talked a little bit about how it would be important for SMEs and other organizations to consider veterans. And I'm just wondering, is this a tool that's being used? And if not, could it be used more effectively?
Yeah, so thank you for the question. So the guide was published in 2020 in the middle of the pandemic. And it has been downloaded in the last 3 months, it's been downloaded more than 200 times. It's also used and taken up by a lot of service providers. So it's not only used by SMEs themselves that are looking to hire, but increasingly organizations that are working with both veterans and employers to improve what they know about that population so that the knowledge can get across the country. It certainly can be disseminated better, and having a single point where resources related to veterans from Veterans Affairs Canada, from CAFTG, where there's valid resources that are available and employers and veterans know where to go and get them is a good start to be able to know the best way to distribute these types of resources across the country.
Thank you. I know based on a lot of research that there are, and I'm going to ask both of you this question, that there are particular groups of veterans that struggle more profoundly. Women veterans, newer veterans who didn't get a lot of time of service, and of course, those veterans that were medically released. And I'm just wondering, in the work that both of you have done, have you found anything that's particularly meaningful or effective for those three groups? Because we want to see their outcomes get better, and I am hoping to have some substantive recommendations in this report that provide guidance for VAC.
So it is true that those are groups that the research shows struggles more. I'll also just reiterate that those are the same groups that also struggle in general employment conditions across the country in different situations that are not veterans as well. But I will say that one of the programs that we have implemented and that we have run that demonstrates a good, strong connection is where the programs are not veteran only. So where we actually can be providing transition support services that combine both veterans as well as employers together to learn about each other at the same time, so that women veterans going through the transition program have a chance to be able to talk with others that are in human resources or in the company, so that the very first time the veterans, especially those that are in marginalized groups or groups that are struggling, have their first civilian career conversation is not at an interview. So the more that we can be integrating the populations and not isolating veterans as they go through the important identity work, psychosocial work, and career exploration work so that they know even where they want to go next, the stronger their sense of confidence will be and the better we'll prepare them.
I would say about the same thing as you just said. I think it's important to open up the conversation to make sure that we create groups that are heterogeneous, and that's what we do, right? We put, veterans that are in that transition process with athletes, with people from the business world, and with artists as well. And what happens and what they tell us is that they realize that civilian world, that's the word they use, is not as bad as they would have expected. And at the same time, the ones that are civilian also get connected to the experience of a veteran. And that opens up the conversation. And that also what creates is that it makes them realize that, going through those struggles, there's a certain level that's higher for veterans, based on their experience. But it's also similar to a lot of other people, and that breaks the isolation and really opens up the conversation. So I think that's one of the biggest points that we have to take into consideration is really opening up that conversation. Thank you.
That's my time.
Thank you very much. I know that you time yourself, so thank you. It was exactly 4 minutes, and that's the end of this panel, and. So sorry for the interruption, but I'd like to offer you, if you have any other information, do not hesitate to send it to our clerk here. And Ms. Taylor, thank you so much for coming. I say that you're from Challenge Factory as president, Lisa Taylor. Et des Quatre Chemins, nous avons Madame Cassandra.
Ms. Cassandra Poudrier.
So thank you for coming. Et je voudrais aussi dire merci, Annalise.
I'd also like to thank the analysts, the clerk, the technical team, and our interpreters. Is it the committee's pleasure to adjourn the meeting? No objection. The meeting is adjourned. Thank you. Take good care.